Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Gavel Gang Podcast, an insight into the collections we get here at Ewbank's auction house in Surrey. Hello, listeners. So today I've come all the way upstairs. I rarely come up here. Oh, what's this room? Is trading cards department? Is that right? Hello, Chris.
Hiya. Yeah, it is actually. Well, it's kind of trading cards / fashion in this room.
Trading cards? That looks like Ellie, fashion Ellie stuff everywhere.
That's
I can
right.
see coats and they don't got anything to do with trading cards.
No.
Well, here we are, another podcast. And what can we expect this week? What have you been doing? Who have you been talking to?
So over the weekend, I went to London Card Show. We saw a lot of nice people there. We were showing off a few things in auction, including some stuff from Steve Wilks, who was the ex-managing director of Wizards of the Coast.
Oh, just let me pause you 1 minute. What's Wizard of the Coast? Because I don't know anything about Pokemon cards other than you guys deal with them up here, and they do very well in auction. But yeah, what or who is Wizard of the Coast?
So Wizards of the Coast were the company that printed the cards back in 1999 to early 2000s. They had the license to.
Yeah. Was that the peak time when everyone was collecting them?
It certainly was the first sort of peak time. Since then, I'd say we've had a number of waves of interest, such as when Pokemon Go came out, there's a huge boom. COVID in 2020, there was another absolute raft of people that started collecting it because they didn't have much else to do because you couldn't go out, you couldn't go anywhere. So yeah, absolutely. But originally that was the huge wave that first happened.
Well, I'll probably learn something from this. So are you interviewing him on today's podcast?
Yeah, I am. I've had a really great chat with Steve this morning. We're basically talking a bit about his time at Wizards of the Coast, you know, what happened, a bit about the development of the cards, what it was like at that time to be involved in such a big project, a little bit about what's happening now and his perspective of how it still endures today and how it's so popular still even now.
Well, I've learned more about Pokemon cards in the last 2 minutes than I have in my entire life, so thanks for that, Chris. So yeah, let's have a listen to Chris and Stephen Wilks. Here we go.
Hi Steve, how you doing?
Very well, thank you, Chris.
So a lot of people may not necessarily know your links with Pokemon or your background. Fill us in on that and what your links are to Wizards of the Coast and Pokemon.
Yes, well, in 1997, I had a phone call from a recruitment headhunter agency telling me about this company called Wizards of the Coast based in Seattle, who I'd never heard of. They were looking for a managing director. And they flew me out to Seattle over a couple of days when I just had a knee operation. It was the only couple of days I could get off without anybody noticing where I'd gone after my knee operation. So they booked me a seat with my leg up as well and flew me out there. And I met these incredible people who were had been developing these games in the basement of their apartments in Seattle whilst still being executives at Boeing. From me being a Brit and sort of stiff upper lip and black, tie and shirt to work to meet these guys that were in their shorts and goodness knows what. But there was something about them at Wizards. So thank goodness I agreed to join them and thank goodness they agreed to offer me a job. Hence, I became managing director for the 4 or 5 years of the period in time when obviously they'd launched Magic the Gathering and they'd just bought Dungeons and Dragons. And then they went on to launch the Pokémon franchise, which is a trading card game, which was incredible. So I had just over 4 years as managing director of the UK business during those incredible years.
What about that initial meeting? As you say, it was perhaps a bit different to what you're used to or what you were used to, but you saw something in it that made you think, yes, I want to sort of get on board with this. What was that sort of in that initial meeting that kind of drove you to be, I want to be involved, I want to do this?
I mean, it was their incredible excitement and enthusiasm to what they had achieved and what they were going to do. The guy who was the head of Europe at the time was a guy called Hans Denneboom, lovely Dutch guy. And he had said to me, Steve, he said, they are different to what you will have seen in the corporate world. Rather than you accept the job from me, because he'd already agreed to offer me the job, he said, you need to go out and see it and meet them and understand what it's about, because I don't want you starting and then 3 months later coming to me and saying, oh, this is different, this isn't for me. So that's why they flew me out there. And then when I met them, the founders, Peter Adkisson, John Jordan, and the guy they'd brought in to be their CEO, Vince Kaluri, they all had this unbelievable passion for what they were doing. And as I say, the likes of Peter and John and others had literally worked, till 3 or 4 or 5 in the morning, nearly every night, we're developing games in their basements,
Wow.
And I said to them, I'm not a gamer as such, but I think you've got something rather special here. And if you want someone to run the business side of it, then, that's what I believe is my skill set. And they were very comfortable with that because they'd already got a lot of people in the business that were gamers and really knew the games inside out. So they didn't need anybody else that, was going to play the games.
Yeah.
They needed someone that could try and find extra distribution, try and find new players of the game, do the marketing aspects of it and all that. So and I said to them, so how's this going forward? What type of thing are you going to do going forward after Magic the Gathering and other games? And they said, well, we definitely will get into sports and hopefully sort of other intellectual properties. And of course, then about a year later, along came Pokemon.
With the inception of Pokemon, was that something that you knew when you first joined that was in the pipeline, or was that kind of came a little bit later, like you said, about a year later?
Pokemon definitely wasn't on the radar when I joined. They may have known there was something going on, but they certainly didn't share that with me at the time. I mean, as you know, in America, the trading cards for sports, baseball, and all that type of thing is incredible and fantastic and big, isn't it?
Huge, yeah.
What they hinted at was more along the lines of getting into that, but from a trading card game perspective, not just as a trading card. So I think that's what excited me. I love my football in the UK and all that type of stuff. Eventually we got to sport, but no, Pokemon itself, it wasn't on my radar. And then, of course, fortunately, probably about 9 months later, there started to become rumors of, the Japanese games freak business needing someone to partner them everywhere else in the world other than Japan. Fortunately, Peter and Vince and his team and John were able to be the ones that were in the spot to take on that, which of course was incredible.
Were you involved in that pitch, or whatever you want to call it, or to get the license to print those cards? Or
no, not at all. No, not at all. It was that was obviously done direct between Japan and Seattle. And by the time myself and the other MDs of the European business were brought in to the loop on it, the agreement had been struck. And of course, in the States, they launched about 9 months ahead of us. So when they launched Base Set, we didn't launch Base Set in the UK until at least 9 months after, which was an interesting period, of course, because as you'll probably remember, Chris, from your days of the game, that if you would become aware of this and you were based in the UK, you either had to have a very good contact in the States to ship some stuff over to you, or, as what was happening, the shops in the UK, more the corner shops than the big retailers, were managing to get it over and were selling a booster pack for £5, so double the price of what eventually they were selling in the UK. But because, of course, they'd had to pay the shipping to get it over, the latent demand for this was so massive. I remember our head office was in Maidenhead in the Nicholson Centre, which is where I had my offices and had my team of people there. And there was a little CTN newsagent literally just outside the shopping centre. And I remember walking in there, and he had 2 booster boxes on his counter, which had arrived from the States that morning. And I went in there about lunchtime to get something about 12:30. He'd already sold 1 complete booster box at £5 a pack, and he'd already opened the second. And he said, I reckon that'll be gone by 5 o'clock this afternoon. It was, double the price and it was just one of those. It wasn't a craze as such, although in the toy industry, we did win Craze of the Year, our big year. But, as is proven by what's gone on since, if it was a craze, it's a very long craze.
It's true. I mean, at the time, did you, that kind of hints at it, I guess, but did you realize it was going to be as big as it was? And what was it like being involved in that and trying to also manage that demand, I guess?
At the outset, we knew it had got a lot of interest. I mean, I remember Jonathan Ross, Jonathan Ross is big into comics, and I think him and Lenny Henry even had a comic shop back in the day. And Jonathan Ross arrived back in Heathrow from somewhere like Florida or something like that, wearing all his family wearing Pokemon t-shirts. And I remember almost punching the air with delight, thinking, yeah, those type of free marketing shots are brilliant. And actually later on we used Jonathan at the launch of the Pokemon movie. So, you know, people like that coming in, that gave you a bit of excitement about what was going on with Pokemon. But as to your question about did we know it was going to be as big as it's proven to be? No, and it's, I can go into some numbers if you want, but the numbers just are off the Richter scale in terms of what we sold. And I had a conversation about 2 months into after we'd launched in the UK. Of course, to get the cards was a long process because you had to buy the paper and get the production reserved. And I remember having a conversation with the head of Europe at the time, and they'd allocated us that we were allowed to have enough stock so that we could sell 17 million pounds worth in our first year of launch. And I remember having a conversation saying, we're way off the mark. We can do 5 times that. And in the end, that 17 million turned into 82 million in one calendar year at invoice prices. We did a calculation at the time of the demographic of children, girls and boys, between the age of about 4 and 14, I think. And we calculated that on the number of cards that had been bought, it meant on average, every child in the UK in that demographic owned over 400 cards. Based on the amount of what we'd sold.
Yeah.
It was, obviously, it's demographics, it's statistics, it's goodness knows what, but that was how much in terms of stock that we sold and was out there.
That's incredible, really. I think what's interesting is the difference in like predicted numbers and obviously what the final amount which was sold and the amount extra you had to print. I think also what's interesting is maybe for anyone that does listen, is that it's very different times because the market's developed a lot now, and there's even more money in it, and even single cards can be selling for in the millions nowadays. But back then, those numbers were probably absolutely huge, right? I mean, for the time in the late 90s, early 2000s.
The thing that was the toy of the year that year was a thing called Dexter Puppy Dog, and they sold 10 million. And I don't know of anybody that remembers Dexter Puppy Dog. And at the Toy Industry Awards, Dexter Puppy Dog got Toy of the Year, and we got Craze of the Year. So, but yeah, no, it was, it was, the numbers were obscene. And I was very fortunate in my career. I became vice president of Leapfrog Toys in the UK, and about 4 years later, with our Leap Pad, we had Toy of the Year again, and we'd sold about 480,000 of these Leap Pads in a year. So it, that still didn't reach the numbers of the Pokemon cards we'd sold, 3 or 4 years before.
You spoke to me a little bit before about, you said about fourth print base set, because I think there was a bit of a story behind that, wasn't there? Or wasn't that to do with that was the numbers as well, and like not having enough? And
that was quite a funny story because I met a chap during COVID. I guess like all of us, we sat, other than going for walks and not bumping into people, I went into my store and found my old Pokemon card and just started to see what I'd got and deciding to sell a few bits and pieces, more playing at it than really serious. I can't really remember how, probably through an eBay ad or something, I came across this lovely chap in London called Harry, who has been very helpful to me over the last 2 or 3 years, because obviously there's a lot of nuances, as you know, to everything that I hadn't really picked up.
Absolutely.
And Harry and I were having a chat, and he said to me, Steve, of course, you may not know, with the base set, there was a fourth print edition, with the years on the bottom. Is it? I think
99 to 2000. Yeah,
exactly. He carried on with the story, and I said, well, actually, yes, Harry, I did know about that because I commissioned it. but he did. But I had sort of forgotten about it. But so it was a very, very interesting time, and of course we ended up selling Pokemon cards in nearly every retail channel you can imagine in the UK. I mean, Claire's Accessories contacted us, can we sell Pokemon cards? And I think, as I might have shared with you, but I spoke to you before, that I'd said to our sales to remember that we are still primary intellectual property that we're trying to sell in this business is Magic the Gathering. And I sort of was almost a throwaway comment, said to our sales director, Jeremy, well, people like Claire's, if they want to buy Pokemon, they're going to have to buy Magic the Gathering as well. and Jeremy came back into me in the office a couple of days later and said, yeah, they'll take it and they'll take Magic the Gathering. We were allocating stock. So it was, people got, small amounts of the stock at the time.
You see, that blows my mind a little bit, because for people that maybe aren't from the UK or don't know what Claire's Accessories is, obviously it's more to do with, I'd say, jewelry and clothing and things like that. So for them to be seeing an opportunity to sell Pokemon cards and potentially Magic the Gathering as well in their store just shows like the power that it had at that time. So you went to the London Card Show on the weekend. We met there as well. What was it like going to a show like that and seeing how it sort of endured, and were you surprised by it?
It was like walking back in time, Chris. It really was. And thank you for mentioning it, and thank you for inviting me and helping me get in there. And it was, as if life had stood still for 20 years. I walked in there and the same feeling, the same atmosphere, the same excitement and enthusiasm about the things. And as you know, I walked around a few stands and a few people asked me what my connection was with it all, because and obviously I said, and the excitement level of some of the people, it's almost makes you feel like a celebrity. But it wasn't just about me. It wasn't about me. It was about the fact that this Pokemon franchise, just continues unabated. And people over the years, in the time I did a Sky News broadcast live, I did a Radio 4 interview with John Humphreys and all that sort of stuff. On all these interviews, everybody said, so what is it about Pokemon that makes it so different, makes it so special? And the honest answer is, I don't know. I genuinely don't know what it was. I mean, it's got all the ingredients of the collectability and got to catch them all, and it's a playing game, but there's been plenty of others as well that have tried, but no, I don't really, I honestly can't answer that question. And as I've tried to over the years, think it through my head what was so different and special about it, but it was just right time, right place, and it continues to still get the interest. And of course, they're still doing a great job of the new expansions and keeping it going. And but as so many of the people I met when they knew when I was involved with it, so many of them were of that age said that was still their favorite era, the sort of the 2000s, 2001s, with those releases and those expansions.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's definitely the same. I mean, there's a lot of nostalgia there, and I think that's what probably drove the market for quite a while. But now you're seeing a lot more, you've got all the youngsters coming through. They're going to probably have a lot of nostalgia for the stuff that's coming out now and interest. And back in the day, I definitely remember it feeling like a craze with Pokemon in the 90s, early 2000s. Like everyone had the games like Red, Blue, Yellow. Everyone was trading cards. The cards got banned at school. Someone stole someone else's Charizard or something. It's like that's how amazing it was back then in terms of just the popularity of everything. We saw from the show on the weekend just the excitement and the fun and the sort of joy that's there to go and see what's out there and picking up things for people's collection, pack ripping and pack battles and all this kind of stuff nowadays.
I'd add to that point, Chris, that as the Wizards business, we used to run the Gen Con, the General Games Convention, which used to be up in Loughborough University just before the university went back. It was sort of end of August, beginning of September. There used to be about 10,000 gamers turn up at this, and Pokemon had just started when, a couple of the last Gen Cons we were there. And there's about 10,000 young adults there, all of them that are having a great time, that are sleeping on campus, that are going to the bar till 3 or 4 in the morning. And I can honestly and genuinely say there wasn't ever one issue. The people that are in this gaming fraternity, should we call it that, were just absolutely delightful people. I mean, some are a bit weird and wacky, and put their outfits and God knows what. And
Aren't we all?
yeah, exactly. But there was never one problem at all, and everybody was very generous with their time, and just it was just a fantastic period of being there. And someone like me who wasn't a gamer to see this, my background was sport and football. If you've got 10,000 people in a football arena with a few beers, then things would start kicking off.
So you don't have a favorite Pokemon or anything like that, then, Steve?
With what's happened with Charizard,
Hard to ignore.
it's hard to ignore, but that's probably not at the time. It's more nowadays than
Yeah.
back then. So I just love the artwork in them. Well, I love the artwork in as well of what, of course, the Magic the Gathering guys did as well, because some of that artwork was spectacular. But they carried it through very well to the Pokemon franchise, but obviously in a more Japanese anime type way. I think Wizards definitely were the best partner for it because, of course, they were able to, we spoke earlier a minute ago about what has made Pokemon special and done different that. And the artwork side of it obviously has to play a large part in that. The people at Wizards in Seattle and all of their artists that they've used, hats off to them. They made it a very special franchise because of that.
Obviously, we were at the show. Ewbank was at the show with a couple of your items. They got quite a lot of interest, especially there's a fossil uncut sheet, which is coming up in our January auction. I was just wondering if you can tell the listeners a little bit more about that sheet and maybe the story behind that.
As you know, on the back of it, it's got a little note saying to Steve, this is for you. Everyone else in the team has been given one. Thank you very much, Sam Ward, who was head of marketing at the time. My recollection of it was that in the States, they decided to send over, it was probably about 20, 25 of these uncut foil sheets as a thank you for the team. I don't think I've ever told you this. Somehow, the police got involved. I think what had happened was that towards the end of the Pokemon craze, the first tranche of it, when we started to destroy some of the cards, when it went off its massive peak, it was still doing, good numbers. But obviously the last one, just as I was leaving the business, they were shipping in bigger numbers than the demand. So they decided rather than to flood the market with cheap cards that we'd destroy. And what happened was some enterprising people in the transport system decided that when they were shipping the cards to the destruction tip, they found a different direction and they never found their way to the tip. And so my recollection is that 4 people were arrested and sent to prison for this. But at the same time, a hollow foil sheet turned up. So just after we'd all been given one. So the police were in with us and we had to give a list of the names of all the people that had been given one of these by the business. I couldn't remember who they were now, obviously, but there was a little bit of some jiggery-pokery going on even when they were given away at the time. But obviously it was a fantastic keepsake for us all. I was fortunate to have more than one, actually, because Sam had given me one, but Peter Atkinson had already given me a couple to give out to customers and goodness knows what. So as a thank you, it was just one of those special mementos. And obviously with Sam's little note to me on the back was nice. And as we were down at London Card Show the other day, the guys that were there that I think
From Collectible Power.
I think it was Matt.
Yeah, Matty.
He showed me on his phone a hollow foil sheet that he'd bought from one of our members of staff. I believe it was a guy called Jeff Ellington, because it said on the top Jeff. And at the bottom, obviously Sam Ward had got me to, the ones she'd given out to the rest of the staff, she'd got me to sign at the bottom of them. So he was able to, on his phone, show me my signature on a thing from, 25 years ago. So yeah, so it's a small world out there with Pokemon. You can't do anything without people knowing about it.
We had a lot of interest in the uncut sheet. I think the thing is, you don't see them that often in person. I mean, obviously there's a few out there, but most people won't get the chance to see it. So it was really nice to be able to take it down to the show and show it off, and people to actually see one in person and how beautiful they are as a full hollow foil sheet. So yeah, that had a lot of interest. And you also had, or you have in the January auction with us, and we took this along to the show as well, a really interesting acrylic commemorative piece, which has a hollow form Mew that's also sort of encapsulated within it and it has a message from you on it. Can you tell us a bit more about that one as well?
Yeah, well, as I said, that was a crazy year that year, and we had retailers that were very supportive of it, although obviously they were going to be very supportive of it because they were all making very, very decent profits out of it. And I just thought at the end of the year, this has been an unbelievable year. We should at least thank more than two or three of our key customers that have gone the extra mile with us. And when I say gone the extra mile, the thank you was because one of the customers that took it from us was WH Smith. We started supplying them, and little old us who'd only been used to supplying Magic the Gathering, into the hobby sector, not to mass retailers. We started supplying into WH Smith. We were shocking at setup of managing getting it into a big retailer's warehouse, and I remember the lady at the time, I think her name was Sarah Story, who was head of buying or whatever her position was. She contacted me. She said, Steve, she said, your service levels into our business on Pokémon. She said, I know we're desperate for them, but you've got to improve on this. Previous to our Wizards, I'd been the general manager for Butter Anchor Foods in Swindon. And the guy used to be the factory manager there, a guy Nick Wright, had set up as a consultant. And he was a very, very astute guy. And I said to Nick, help. Come in. And also because WH Smith were in Swindon and he was in Swindon, help. So he came in for 3 weeks to help us get all structured and set up to be able to supply into the major retailers. And God bless him, about 3 weeks, 3 weeks later, I had a phone call from Sarah Story. She said, I don't know how you manage it, Steve, but you've gone from our worst supplier to our best supplier in 3 weeks. But the point going back to the story about retailers, it was a case of, a few retailers had gone the extra mile with us. And I just felt that it was appropriate that at the end of that fantastic year, that they could have something that would maybe sit in their office behind their desk, just to remember that great year. So I think we had 20 made. I personally gave out a couple. I remember giving one to Woolworths, and Jeremy, who was my sales director, and the national account manager, were each given 2 or 3 to give to their key customers. I know one other one is with a business that did a lot of consultancy work with us at a period, a company called Bridgethorne. And I know that they had one in their reception for many years. So there's about 20 around and about. I don't know where they are now. I know where one is. And it was just a thank you, really. It was nothing more than that. It wasn't to try and do it for, future values and that. It was just a pure thank you for helping support us through what's been an incredible year. So yeah, that was made, and it was I think one of our marketing agencies or to organize them for us, and obviously as I did an engraved signature on it as well, just as I guess well, not to protect it, but just to show a thank you from us as a business.
Well, it's interesting because I've never seen one prior to you showing it to me. So like you said, if there's only 20 made, whether they've surfaced before or not, I couldn't find any history on it at all, Steve. So it's a really interesting piece to see. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes in January.
I'm sure if this becomes more broad stream and people become aware, I'm sure there's a few, well, of course, a few may have been thrown away, but some will come out of the woodwork. So, yeah.
There probably will be a few that have been thrown away, that's for sure. I tell you what, your story as well, you were saying earlier about obviously some of the cards were destroyed as perhaps the popularity, because obviously people know with Pokemon there was this huge boom, and then it did sort of wane for a few years before coming back. And hearing about cards being destroyed, I'm sure there'll be a few collectors' hearts that are breaking a little bit hearing about that.
I do remember Gary Grant, who owns the Entertainer toy stores. Every phase we launched in the first 2.5 years of Pokemon sold out. We had a very good barometer of that because our largest distribution channel for selling Pokemon in the UK was the news trade. And I had a very, very good partner. I think they were called DDL. And I don't know if you're familiar with how, like your daily newspapers, the way it works with that news trade is they ship, say, 100 Daily Mails into the corner shop, the CTN news shop, and it's all on sale or return. So if they only sell 50 that day, then the following day when they come to deliver next day's papers, they collect back 50 and they credit back 50 on their account. So we sold our Pokemon cards into the news trade sector on that basis, sale or return. And for the first 2.5 years, we didn't get a single return, which is unheard of in their sector, because
Wow.
at the time. So we knew the very first expansion that didn't have a complete sell-through. I'm gonna say it was one of the Neos, but I can't remember. Might have been Gym Challenge, I think. The first one that didn't have a complete sell-through of everything we'd shipped in. And I remember at the time we hadn't decided as a business not to sell it. We were considering what we should do with it. So I did a deal with Gary Grant at the Entertainer to make sure that we didn't have to just destroy these items. And of course, it meant that Gary got a very large shipment of this stock rather than destroy it. And I saw Gary at a function, and I'll probably see him at another function this coming weekend, when he was thanking me for that deal back in that 2001, which was a very lucrative deal for him as well, and it worked for us as well. So that was that. And then after that was when we'd already arranged to ship in the stock and decided that it'd be pointless to sort of do anything that would devalue the brand going forward. So that's when we decided to destroy rather than try and find a way of selling it through.
I think what's also quite interesting was, I think we touched on it previously before. We sort of talked a little bit about telling what a fake Pokemon card is.
It always reminds me of the going back into medieval times about how you found out if the lady in the village was a witch, that you put her on the ducking stool, and if you ducked her and she didn't come up, then she wasn't a witch. But if she came up, she was a witch. And to me, it was the way you found out was exactly the same principle. Is you had to rip the card open to find out. I mean, I guess nowadays there's probably a laser that you could use to check what's in the inside. But literally, to find out at the time when there was a lot of fakes, of course, that's when I did the live Sky News interview, when at the start of, before I came and I did the live bit, they showed the footage of people being arrested in China in the fake factories of the counterfeiting factories. So I think there was 4 big factories that were closed down. So there was at some point there quite a bit of fake going on, but I think that's filtered out of the system now, and I think they're fairly easy to spot from what my understanding is. But no, going back to the actual, our card that we ordered, which is why it all wasn't easy to bring new stock and new manufacturing straight away, because of course we were very, very secure in what we did to make sure that ours was very unique and a high quality card. And of course that coloured strip in the middle of the card, which could only be seen when you tore it open to find out.
There's definitely ways that you can tell without ripping it open if you have handled a lot of cards, and having sort of 10 years collecting again as an adult, you sort of learn to spot the signs. But it's interesting because what you're saying about in China, like the factories there, because I've had quite a few people consigning items or bringing items into auction for valuation, and they've been childhood collections. They believe they're real, but then I've looked at them and there's loads of them that are fake. It's interesting for me because as a kid, I didn't really think about fakes or what was real. And I probably didn't even know the difference. And seeing that there were so many fakes out there even back then. And I think one person told me that they bought a lot of their cards in Hong Kong. A lot of them were fakes. So, that kind of all matches up. And it's quite interesting to hear that there were actually full-on factories developing fakes in China at that time because the demand was so big, I guess.
And I guess that's why when I sold a few of mine in the COVID period, I got scammed a few times on eBay. People were saying what I'd sent them wasn't what I described, and they sent me something back and it wasn't at all what I'd sent them. I only played at it. I didn't do it big time. I was just bored during COVID sort of thing. So I guess at least at least I'm confident that what I've got in my cupboard is genuine. Because and funnily enough, at the London Card Show, I bumped into one of our major manufacturers, the Carter Mundy people, in Belgium, in Turnhout, made the majority of ours at the time before we brought on extra factories. And then we brought on a company down in Canvey Island called Games in Print towards the middle of the craze when I was there. And both of those factories were absolutely spot on, great people, and did a fantastic job. And also because of the demand, ran the print lines 24/7 to make sure that we got it to the consumer as quickly as we could.
There's an interesting couple of points from that, actually, Steve. First one I wanted to touch on was obviously you're talking about the risk of fakes and like people scamming and things like that. And I think the useful thing is if anyone is looking at your items in auction in January, especially things like you've got the Neo booster box in there, you've got Gym Challenge booster box in there. You know, there's a lot of worry about reseals in the market nowadays. They can see the provenance, they can see it's come directly from you. I think that gives a lot of buyer confidence in that, which is really helpful. But the other thing I wanted to touch on was you mentioned games in print. And it's funny that I've actually had another client that has come in and consigned a few items with us. And I believe their dad used to work at Games in Print.
Oh, really?
So it's some of his cards from that time. So
wow.
it's quite interesting. Again, the links, like you say, it's a small world. And I think that they said that they actually printed a lot of the foreign cards. So stuff for like Italy, France, Germany. Is that right?
I think we had 11 factories towards the end of my period at the business around the world. So the Belgian one, Cartamundi, and the Games in Print in Canvey Island were the two major ones that we did Europe. So I think they also did German as well. And to be fair, they were still running the print 24/7 when I left the business in 2001. An interesting story about the Italian market, actually, if I've got my facts right. They sold their Pokemon cards in a Pokemon magazine. I mean, I wasn't running the Italian market, but this is what I heard from the team in Italy, that there was an element of VAT that if your card was a giveaway free in a magazine, then there was no VAT on the magazine. And so they did it in Italy that way. So to get your Pokemon booster packs, you got them free in a magazine, but it cost you less to buy them because there was no VAT, because you were buying a magazine that was exempt of VAT.
It definitely seems like certainly Italian and quite a few of the other languages are rarer and harder to find. Doesn't seem to be as many printed, but I don't know if you know much about print numbers for them.
Funny enough, I've got in my office here, as I think I said to you, we're moving out shortly, so I've been going through and checking out what I've got, and I did find all the numbers from and the UK was by far and away. I mean, the UK, actually, the sales in the UK, and if you added up France, Italy, Germany, and all those added together, didn't come to the total of what we did in the UK. So yeah, we were the lead by a long way in Europe. The guy who ran the French operation, Yves, was a lovely guy, and they did a fantastic job there. And I think, you know, they still did some very big numbers in France. And they'd got a really nice setup as well in France. Their gaming community was very, very much like the British gaming community. I remember we went out to a product launch, which we had on an island just outside of Monaco. And we all got on a boat and shipped out there. And I remember thinking that the French players of all the games, and Pokemon in particular, were identical to ours. And it just was just nice to see that the setups around Europe, whilst not probably as high a demand as the UK market in terms of sales, was still, it was very popular throughout Europe.
It kind of transcended borders and languages and, yeah, cultures, I guess.
I remember also, actually, you just reminded me that transcending borders. I remember being at one of the toy fairs in London at Olympia, and a guy came up to me and said, "You've done a fantastic job here with Pokemon of finding a franchise, an intellectual property, whatever you like to call it, that appeals to boys and girls equally the same." He said, "My daughter," who I think she was about 6 or 7 at the time, she's always been, you know, she can't play with the boys with what other toys it was, because it just didn't have the same appeal, or they wouldn't involve girls in the same way and all that, you know, girls, or we don't want to play with girls, etc. And he said, you know, she's felt so included with Pokemon because it's equal. And this guy was a guy called Jonathan Margolis, who's quite a famous writer. Did biographies of people like what's it, Fawlty Towers, John Cleese, and people like that.
Amazing.
So, and he came up to us at the toy fair with her and said that to us, which I thought actually, I don't know if it's intentional or clever or whatever the way, but it was nice to think that, you know, and that also going back to why Pokemon has been successful, maybe another part of the reason that it was inclusive of everybody.
Absolutely. I think that's so true. I think it's, you see, again, going back to the show that we went to at the weekend, you see people, like you say, boys, girls, young, old, like you have people from all different eras, age groups, genders. It kind of hits everyone. I think the thing is, the nice thing about it is that it's very wholesome. I think it just brings a lot of joy and interest. And I think the collectability part really pulls people in. You know, I definitely feel like I've gone down a massive rabbit hole. So when I was a kid, so I collected the jungle set. I think I might have talked about this before with you, but I remember when I was trying to collect it, I had this Snorlax and it looked like a base set card because it didn't have the little jungle flower symbol on the card, but it was numbered for jungle, and I had the list. I had, you know, used to get the list with the theme decks and stuff. Yeah, exactly. So I was checking off the list as a kid, you know, I was like, yeah, that's the number, that's the card, but it hasn't got the thing. And it really confused me. And only, you know, years later as an adult did I find out that actually it was a printing error, that some of the cards had not been printed with that sort of jungle sort of flower on it. And they're now known as, you know, the no symbol error. And so for me, like, no symbol jungle cards are something that are really nostalgic to me as well. And I sort of collect a few of those and I love them because it's just another little memory or a little nuanced thing, you know. And there's so many of them in the hobby. And I think that's also what helps with the popularity and the drive and the continued interest, is that you can just deep dive into all different areas and you can have people collecting all different types of things, and it doesn't really matter what you want to collect. It doesn't matter if you collect, you know, cards that are worth pennies, cards that are worth millions of dollars or pounds. You've got people at each end of the spectrum and all the way in between. So yeah, it's just as someone that's really invested obviously in the hobby and as a collector, it just means a lot from my perspective. Sorry, I'm harking on now.
No. I find it interesting. It did strike me there that, funnily enough, I was going through my personal bits and pieces in folders were assembled for me by our organised play team. We had an organised team because, of course, it was a game. When I was looking through last week, my personal collection of things like base sets are organized not in, you know, the 1 to 102 in terms of card numbers. They're organized in play groupings because, of course, the organized play team were the people that went out. We had a road show, you know, and we had an organized Grand Prix of tournaments out there with children came along in their thousands playing the game. And I mean, for the rocket launch, we took over the O2, the Millennium Dome. We literally had hired the Millennium Dome for the day, which Sam Ward, the head of marketing we talked about, she headed it up. She did a fantastic job. I remember her standing down in the bottom of the dome like someone in a circus in a big tent, you know, the leader of the circus there, announcing the launch of rocket. And we had acrobats stream down from the roof of the dome and released 30,000 Pokemon cards from the top. It was spectacular, absolutely spectacular. And I remember, and I had a little VIP area where I'd invited people from the trade. I remember a guy there who was the head of Safeways at the time, a guy called Jack Sinclair, who's done very well for himself. And he was there with his children and twins and that, who were still in prams and or buggies. And he said, Steve, I'd never realized it was a game as such. And of course, people didn't, but it was all about collectability in the masses. But of course, there were thousands that used to come up and sit there and play. Even Woolworths, would you believe, bought into the fact of the playing of it. And we managed to organize in about 120 Woolworths stores on Saturday morning an area which they put aside where we could help do a play area for people wanting to come in and play Pokemon. That also, I think, is part of the appeal to it, that whilst most of the consumers bought it for the trading and got to catch them all, etc., there was this element of those that really got into the playing side, which of course is the heritage of Wizards of the Coast. Magic the Gathering was very much about playing and less about collecting. And I think the two married very well.
I mean, it's hard to know, but I'd say majority probably are collectors, but there's definitely an avid and solid sort of group of players there, and I think it's probably quite tight knit. I know when I was a kid, I did play a bit with my brother, so my brother was also into it, and I really enjoyed that then. I think now it's probably developed a lot more. It's quite a lot more complicated, I think, having looked at some of the different cards and how it works. But yeah, you've definitely got that kind of the player group and collector group, and obviously the crossover of both, where people do both. And I think it's interesting because I went to Worlds in London when it was there, the World Championships, and the amount of different people that come to this now, to this event, and it's just so huge. It was in the XL in London, and it took up the whole thing. They had the Pokémon Center there where you could buy lots of merchandise. You could go and watch them playing, and it wasn't just the card games, it's now like the video games, and it's such a popular event. And obviously you get lots of cool things, like you get promotional cards that are released as part of the event that people can get, and staff cards which are given out to staff, and obviously the people that play and compete can win cards and trophies from it and things like that. So it's just really fascinating to see, and that was the first one I've ever managed to get to because it was in the UK, so it was really interesting to see. But I hope to get to another one hopefully in the future. But yeah, again, it just shows the strength of the hobby, really.
It struck me as well, just thinking about it there, that in terms of marketing the Pokemon cards, as you know, I've run a few businesses and had marketing budgets that sort of equivalent to 5, 6, 7, 8% of the gross income of the business. For marketing on Pokemon, the only thing we ever spent real money on marketing was the organized play, the tournaments, the events. We never had a Pokemon card TV advert. We never placed ads in the press to entice people to buy it because we didn't need to. The demand was there. So the great thing from that was our marketing spend was all about arranging events and organizing venues for people so they could come along and attend and play the game, which was an absolute delight for someone in my position, rather than having to buying TV spots and that, which I've done many times since and before. But it was a perfect storm, really, the whole scenario as it was. And the team I had in the UK, Wizards of the Coast UK, I had a fantastic team of people, and it was a nice mix of people that knew. I was just talking about the people that organised my folders, a young lad called Gideon Moss. I remember him spending hours putting together folders for me, which is now my personal collection. Several other people I've been in touch with since. A young lady was one of our marketing team, Claire, she came away from the toy fair with the big cards that we'd have had in the toy fair to display it. She ended up with them, and I think she sold them recently in the States. And they were a great team, great times and great memories. And I think I shared with you at the time the amount of celebrities that wanted the cards. That call we had from Madonna's office, where Madonna's PA had been told, whatever you do, you must get me a full set of Pokemon cards for my daughter. And that, over a beer, I've told people this story many times of how I turned down Madonna because the PA had said, Madonna had said, tell them they can have whatever they want if I get a full set. And of course we had to turn them down because the truth of the matter was that the cards were produced randomly, and to create a full set, we had to put we'd have had to put someone in the warehouse, open up hundreds of boxes individually, and to create a full set. So so we turned down Madonna. I regret it now.
Yeah, I bet. Well, thanks a lot, Steve. It's been really nice to have a chat to you about all of this stuff.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to the London Card Show last weekend, because it certainly did reignite my passion, but also reintroduce me into the people that are the collective that have done this whole Pokemon thing proud over the years.
Thank you so much.
Good to speak to you, Chris.
Good to speak to you too.
Thank you for listening to the Gavel Gang Podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please subscribe and take a look at the Ewbank's website for more information on this and upcoming auctions. Until next time, going.